Welcome back, everybody. We made it. This is 1979. These are the best horror films that came out in the year 1979. The 70s were a terrific decade for horror films. Pretty much it started introducing the slasher films, the monster films such as Jaws, Piranha, Tentacles, Octopus, Barracuda, Crocodile, Frogs, all these, Grizzly. The 70s brought you everything that scared you for animals. And then the swarm, the bees, the killer bees, hives, and whatnot. Now we're on to 1979. We're wrapping up the 70s horror films. These are the best horror films of 1979. If you haven't already, check my playlist. I have every single year of every single decade of horror films. Check them out and see how the horror film genre progressed as we move along. We're wrapping up the year 1979. Once we're done with this year, stay tuned because to me, the 80s were the best decade for horror films. But right now, we're going to tackle the best horror films that scared everybody, audiences worldwide, in movie theaters, drive-ins, and cable TV. Well, actually, no cable TV. It's 1979. But you may have watched these movies on cable TV after the fact. But these are the films, the best horror films of 1979. Alright, let's check them out. Alien. The crew of a commercial spacecraft encounters a deadly life form after investigating a mysterious transmission of unknown origin. Alien. One of the scariest movies of all time. Crocodile. Again. A giant crocodile is killing and frightening people living nearby rivers. Two men whose wives and daughter have been killed by the crocodile decide to chase and eliminate it. Dracula. Frank Langella. In 1913, the charming, seductive, and sinister vampire Count Dracula travels to England in search of an immortal bride. This movie was great when it came out. Dracula. Another Dracula movie, Love at First Bite, but it was a comedy horror. After being evicted from his castle in Transylvania, Count Dracula and his assistant Renfield travel to New York to find a woman and kill people. Love at First Bite. The Plague. An ambitious lab assistant carries out a forbidden experiment and accidentally creates a deadly bacteria which kills people in its path. Plague. Meteor. The U.S. must join forces with the USSR in order to destroy a gigantic asteroid heading straight for Earth. So the U.S. and USSR team up. Misterio en las Bermudas. Mystery in the Bermudas, featuring El Santo and Blue Demon, the Mexican wrestlers. They kill Dr. Grow and monsters. So they're going to kill people in the Bermudas. Phantasm. Newly orphaned teenager Mike Pearson, his older brother Jody, and their friends face off against a mysterious grave robber known as the Tall Man. Phantasm, one of the scariest movies of all time. The Plague. An ambitious lab assistant unleashes a horrible plague onto the world, and that's what happens. The Plague. Of course, we will delete this as we go on. One of the scariest movies of all time in 1979, Salem's Lot. It was scary. A novelist and a young horror fan attempt to save a small New England town which has been invaded by vampires. Salem's Lot. Savage Weekend. Several couples head upstate to the country to watch a boat being built. Unfortunately, they are stalked by a murderer behind a ghoulish mask. Savage Weekend. Screams of a Winter Night. An anthology in which a group of college co-eds spending a winter's night in a remote cabin pass time by telling scary stories to each other. Screams of a Winter Night. The Amityville Horror. Newlyweds and their 3 children move into a large house where a mass murder was committed. They start to experience strange things in the house as it's possessed by the devil. The Visitor. The soul of a young girl with telekinetic powers and her mother become the prize in a battle between good ETs and evil ETs. The Visitor. Tourist Trap, another scary movie. A group of young friends stranded at a secluded roadside museum are stalked by a masked assailant who uses his telekinetic powers to control the attraction's mannequins. Tourist Trap. When a Stranger Calls. A psychopathic killer terrorizes a babysitter, then returns 7 years later to menace her again. This movie was chilling and scary. When a Stranger Calls. Zombie. Strangers searching for a young woman's missing father arrive at a tropical island where a doctor desperately seeks the cause and cure of a recent epidemic of the undead. The Sky is Falling. The Sky is Falling is a 1979 Spanish thriller film. Stars Dennis Hopper and Carol Baker. It's about killing. Blood Rage. A sexually frustrated young man kills hookers. Blood Rage. Who wasn't killing hookers in the 70s? That's why people didn't hitchhike. They killed hitchhikers and prostitutes. Bog. Dynamite fishing in a rural swamp revives a prehistoric grill monster that must have the blood of human females in order to survive. Bog. Beyond the Darkness. A disturbed young taxidermist exhumes his recently deceased girlfriend, brings her body to his family villa, and proceeds to embalm her corpse. Beyond the Darkness. Buomo Omega. Casting the Runes. Like Curse of the Demons, this adaptation is only very loosely based on the original ghost story by James. However, it does feature eerie scenic views. Casting of the Runes. Delirium. An ex-soldier is hired by local right-wingers as a vigilante to clean up criminals and street people. Delirium will not disappoint. Don't Go in the House. A disturbed young man who was burned as a child by a sadistic mother stalks women with a flamethrower. So he's burned, now he's going around burning people. Don't Go Near the Park. Two siblings cursed in prehistoric times survive for a millennial by feasting on the entrails of young people, prowling in what eventually becomes a park in contemporary Los Angeles. Dr. Jekyll's Dungeon of Death. Dr. Henry Jekyll, the great-grandson and namesake of the original Dr. Henry Jekyll, kidnaps people and experiments on them. Dr. Jekyll's Dungeon of Death. The Driller Killer. An artist slowly goes insane while struggling to pay his bills, work on his paintings, and care for his two female roommates. The Driller Killer. The Evictors. A nice young couple move into an eerie house which is located in a small Louisiana town, unaware of its violent history. The Evictors. Fascination. A runaway criminal breaks into an eerie chateau, taking its two frightened chambermaids hostage. Fascination. Folk horror, vampire horror, and thriller. The Island of the Fishermen. Aquatic creatures threaten the existence of a mysterious island. The Island of the Fishermen. Or the Fishmen, rather. The Island of the Fishmen. Now we have is Killer Fish. Jewel thieves attempt to recover treasure from piranha-infested waters. Mistrust and betrayals happen amongst the gang in the quest for gold. That means people are going to be thrown into the water to dispose of witnesses. Dracula's Last Rites. Low-budget horror film has a conspiracy of vampires in a small town. A local sheriff trying to stop the vampires. Murder by Decree. Sherlock Holmes investigates the murders committed by Jack the Ripper and discovers a conspiracy to protect the killer. Who can be protecting Jack the Ripper? The Halloween that almost wasn't. Upset by rumors a Halloween may end, Dracula calls his mild-mannered monsters together and delivers an ultimatum: either regain the frightening image or leave his Transylvania castle forever. Nightwing. Killer bats plague an Indian reservation in New Mexico. See the theme? Killer animals, sea creatures, monsters, killing people. Nocturna. Dracula's granddaughter falls in love with a disco guitarist and runs away to New York City with him. Nocturna. So you know she's going to be killing people because she has to survive by drinking her victim's blood. Nosferatu, the vampire. Count Dracula moves from Transylvania to Wismar, spreading the Black Plague across the land. Only a woman pure of heart can bring an end to his reign of horror. The Silent Scream. During her first semester at college, a co-ed finds housing at a seaside mansion where, following the death of a fellow student, she becomes entangled in a murder mystery surrounding the property and secretive tenants. Prophecy. A government health inspector is dispatched to assess the damage of a logging company as causing to patch a forest claimed by Native Americans. Prophecy and Killer Bears. Salem's Lot. A novelist and young horror fan attempt to save a small New England town which has been invaded by vampires. This movie was eerie, scary, and spooky. The House by the Edge of the Lake. A young woman returns to the country chateau where her mother drowned years ago. There is something haunting about the place, a supernatural ambience. The Clonus Horror. In a seemingly perfect society, one member discovers the truth about the outside world, as well as their ultimate purpose. The Clonus Horror. The Dark. Someone or something is on an indiscriminate killing and mutilation spree during nighttime. The Dark will not disappoint. If you like kills, check out The Dark. The Meat Eater. Psychopathic killer stalks teens at a rundown, abandoned movie theater. The Meat Eater. If you like ghoul and fun horror films, The Meat Eater will make you laugh but also give you some jump scares. The Orphan. A disturbed young man is plagued by horrific headaches that he believes make him commit murders. You have a date with death. Friday the 13th. The Demon. Random people are terrorized by a malevolent man wearing a black leather glove with razor fingers, who brings their worst fears to life. The Demon. This movie will not disappoint. The Great Alligator. Tourists on a tropical island anger an island god who turns himself into a giant alligator and stalks them. The Great Alligator. The Shark Hunter. A crusty recluse on a Caribbean island who is dedicated to destroying sharks gets involved in a hunt for buried treasure. The Shark Hunter. The Brood. A man tries to uncover unconventional psychologist therapy techniques on his institutionalized wife amidst a series of brutal murders. The Brood. Thirst. The descendant of Elizabeth Bathory is abducted by a cult of blood-drinking, self-proclaimed supermen who want her to join them. Thirst. The Capture of Bigfoot. A series of killings occur with no suspects. The locals soon decide that Bigfoot is responsible. Up from the Last Run. A giant shark-like creature preys on a Hawaiian tourist community. Up from the Last Run. Your vacation is about to end. Weasels rip my flesh. Returning from the planet Venus, an errant NASA spacecraft crashes into the ocean, spilling its radioactive cargo, creating sea creatures that terrorize the Earth. When a stranger calls, a psychopathic killer terrorizes the babysitter then returns 7 years later to menace her again. Next up we have is the classic Wolfman. A man finds out that his family has a werewolf curse put upon them. Wolfman. This movie is scary with a lot of jump scares and kills. Zombie. Strangers searching for a young woman's missing father arrive at a tropical island where a doctor desperately seeks the cause and cure of a recent epidemic of the undead. Zombie. Those were the horror films of 1979. Those are the best horror movies of 1979. We have just wrapped up the decade of the 70s. If you notice, the 70s pretty much started a lot of slasher films. The 70s, stalking films, creature films. Remember you had Jaws, sharks, you had crocodiles, you had octopuses, piranhas, barracudas, frogs, Empire of the Ants, you had ants, you had killer bees, you also had killer rats with Ben and Willard. You know, what else did you have? I already mentioned piranha, crocodiles, grizzly, you had bears, you had sea creatures. So Jaws capitalized on a lot of monsters killing people. And so, what do you think about the horror films of the 70s, let alone the best horror films of 1979? The 70s were great. They were a precursor to the 80s, which I think was the best decade of horror films. So stay tuned as we get close to unleashing the best horror films of the 1980s. 1980 through 1989. We got a ton of movies to cover, so stay tuned for that because the 80s are pretty much like the best decade of everything. So coming up, stay tuned for the best horror films of the 80s, starting with 1980. But that wraps up our best horror films of the 70s with the year 1979. If you have any questions, comments, or feedback, leave them below. Go ahead and check around my website. My YouTube is Yesteryear TV. Go ahead and check the playlist, and I have tons of videos for you. We have celebrity deaths. We have the best movies of all time, the best teen movies of all time, and we have the best horror films of all time, of every year, every genre, every decade. All right, thanks for watching. I'll see you all real soon. Stay tuned. Coming up, I'll give you a heads up when we continue with the best horror films of the 1980s, 1980 through 1989. That's going to be a whopper of a series, so stay tuned for that. I'll give you a heads up when we unleash it. All right, thanks everybody for watching. Click subscribe. I'll see you all in the next video.